Welcome Year 8 to your second lesson on the poem Human Interest, found in your Identity Poetry booklet. If you can grab your poetry booklet so that you can make some annotations on the poem and a pen and some things to write some notes down, then you will have a Google form to complete at the end of this video. Thank you. So before we have a look at the second half of the poem, let's just recap last lesson. So last time we looked at the first two stanzas or chunks of the poem, and we picked out some different things to talk about. First of all, we looked at the mood of the poem through the choices of language that the narrator is using to show us how he feels, and there's quite a range of emotions through the poem. Then we talked about unreliable narrators, so voices and identities that we shouldn't necessarily trust, and how the construction of that narrator, of that narrative voice telling us the story, helps us to either trust or distrust, in this case, this narrator, because he's unreliable because of things that we get told. We can't believe or trust what he says. We also found colloquialisms in the first half of this poem. So to remind you, a colloquialism is that informal language or phrasing that we have to interpret. And that tells us something about our narrator, about their casual use of language and the way that they talk to us as readers. We also found some evidence of the use of an expletive. So a reminder, an expletive is like a swear word, a rude word that we often aim at people or objects, and that shows anger in the narrator by his use of that word. And then finally, we looked at metaphors. Now, metaphors help us to associate one thing with another thing by saying it is that thing. Often means that we have to look metaphorically into the meaning rather than the literal meaning. And it helps to create imagery for the reader to help us to visualize these associations in our minds. So that's what we looked at last time. We're going to have a read through in the next bit of the second half of the poem, and I'm hoping that through your use of that knowledge from last lesson, you can spot a few things. Let's read the second half of the poem through. I loved her. When I accused her, she cried and denied it. Straight up, she tore me apart. On the Monday, I found the other bloke had bought her a chain with a silver heart. When I think about her now, I near choke with grief. My baby. She wasn't a tart or nothing. I wouldn't harm a fly. No joke. Okay, so I'd like you, using your Identity Poetry booklet, to, in that booklet, underline in those last two stanzas any metaphors that you can see. So remember, a metaphor is when you say something is something else and helps to create that imagery. It's also something that can't literally be true. So go through and underline any metaphors you find. Once you've done that, you can then either highlight or circle, if you don't have a highlighter, any colloquial language, so any informal phrasing that tells us the character's personality. Thank you. Let's look at the imagery in this particular line. So we have the other bloke had bought her a chain with a silver heart. You have a picture on the left-hand side here of a chain with a silver heart. So what is this imagery and this particular line telling us here? So first of all, we have another bloke, okay, which is again some colloquial language. And this other bloke, this person who he is threatened, I guess, by, has bought her a chain with a silver heart. Now think about what the noun heart tells us and represents. Also, The fact that it's silver in colour tells us something as well, or silver metal tells us something. What is the narrator getting at here? Why is he insulted at this point? Jot down your ideas. So what we need to do now is have a look at pronouns, but specifically possessive pronouns. Now, as we know, a pronoun is a word which stipulates or tells us who we are talking about. So there are different forms of pronouns. So I is a pronoun, me, you, he, she, they. They're all forms of pronouns, and different pronouns are used for different things. So, for example, if you want to directly talk to someone, you would use you, okay, and that makes the reader know that you're talking directly to them. That's a technique called direct address. But possessive pronouns are special because they dictate ownership and belonging of whatever it is they're talking about. So they tell us specifically who is in possession of this person or thing. Now let's have a look at some of the examples in the second half of this slide. So the pronouns are in red, but the possessive pronouns are in yellow. So let's look at the first one. It's her first son. So the son is a pronoun, it's a name for a person, but it belongs to her. So that's singular, just one woman, and it's stipulating that the son belongs to that one woman. The second one, you are mine. Okay, so you is a pronoun, we're talking to the person here, but we are saying that the mine, the me, the narrator, owns you, them, okay? The family car is theirs to share. So theirs here is a plural thing, okay? More than one person owns this family car, so it's distributed out equally. And then finally, my heart is yours. And here, the person talking, the my, which is a pronoun, is giving away the ownership of their heart because it's yours. Okay, so that shows that the ownership goes to the other person. Now, why is this important? I'm going to, on the next slide, show you a line from the poem, and I want you to think very carefully about the possessive pronoun used in the line, and think about what, because the choice of the possessive pronoun and what it's telling you is being owned, how that changes our interpretation. So look at this line here, and I want you to tell me, firstly, what the possessive pronoun is, which word it is in this line, and then secondly, what that then tells us about how the narrator feels about the dead woman. So the line is simply my baby. So which is the possessive pronoun, and what does it tell us about how he feels about her now? So bringing to a close, our final line here is I wouldn't harm a fly. No joke. So I want you to look at that line, and I want you to try and answer these three questions. So first of all, why don't we believe him? He is an unreliable narrator in this final line, I wouldn't harm a fly, no joke. Why don't we believe him? Secondly, why has he clarified his statement, I wouldn't harm a fly, with no joke? What does this suggest to us about how truthful he is? And then thirdly, is this a topic that you should joke about? How does that final extra clause, no joke, make us feel about him as readers? Now that you've listened to the lesson, I'd like you to either complete the Google form that is on here with your responses to some of the questions following your listening to this video, or you can upload photos of your notes on the poem to your teacher on here as well. Thank you for listening.